If a student fails every class in the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, all of middle school, you failed every class. You showed up, didn't do much of nothing. Once middle school graduation happens, most of them won't let you walk the stage or do the ceremony, but you go into the 9th grade the next year. Is that a little bit more clear for you? It happens not only here in California, but it happens in other places around the country as well. Hello, Happy New Year. What's going on, folks? I'm excited about this episode because this is another one of our conversations about education, but not only education as a big whole monolith, as a big whole system. We're talking about language. We're talking about communication and conversations. I went to a conference recently called Exchange 24. This was in Washington, D.C. It was put on by the XQ Institute and the Carnegie Foundation. And man, the number of big ideas and conversations that came out of this conference I'm still grappling with today. And I think that I'm going to be grappling with them probably for this next season in these conversations. If we're going to transform education, if we're going to figure out how to make schools receivable and ready for all students, then we definitely have to have more conversations where we're talking about how we're describing it. There's going to be 3 things that we're going to talk about that I think will hopefully expand your thinking about education and how we describe and talk about education to those around us. So in today's episode, you're going to learn, 1, some of the differences between the Democrats and Republicans when they describe what they think is best for students and the things that are more important to them. 2, what are the words that we should be using and words to lose in terms of advocating for yourself as a teacher or advocating for education, reform, and transformation? And 3, the matriculation problem in the United States, mostly talking about middle school education. And if you don't know the challenge of middle school education, you definitely want to stay tuned for that. So I invite you right now, take out your notes and let's get started with the show. As a male educator at your school site, it can get lonely. Only 23% of K-12 educators in America are male. And just think about what this gender gap means for your male students. They experience disproportionate levels of discipline. This is a show for male educators who want to feel more understood by their community and want to create emotionally safe classrooms and schools for the next generation of male students. Welcome to Unmasking with Male Educators. So listen, I had the opportunity to go to this conference in Washington, D.C. It was a beautiful conference, a lot of learning, a lot of amazing people in education having conversations. And one of the talks that really began to open my mind, the first day 1 in the morning, was Dr. Frank Luntz. Now, you may have heard of him. He's a pollster. He talks about education and he says things that people don't like to hear, don't want to hear, actually disagree with. And actually, I imagine, and I think it's important to be in disagreement with things that don't sound right. But what I took away from this conversation and what the things that I grappled with in his conversation are actually things that actually illuminated some new things for me. So I'm going to talk about a few of those things. And the first is how we are talking about education differently. How Republicans, how Democrats talk about education differently. Now, I'm going to do it in a couple of ways. First, I'm going to read what the purpose of the conference was for. And then hopefully after I read that, that will help give you some idea of this conversation that we're going to talk about what I learned and what I took away from it. Okay. This is the statement for the conference, Exchange 24. The United States was the first country in the world to declare high school education a universal right. And we continue to believe that the future of our country is inextricably linked to the future of our young people. Exchange 24 is a chance for us to blaze a path forward for high school, one that gives students the rich blend of knowledge and skills they need to succeed in college, career, and life. So let's move into topic 1. The difference between Democrats and Republicans and how they describe the things that are important to them in education. You see, messaging is important. And so if we're not clear about the messaging we're using, we're going to lose people before we even get to have a healthy conversation about it. If the topics that we're talking about are important to everyone, then we hope to be able to talk more about those topics. So let me talk about first. There were 7 responses that were the highest issues facing students today. Now, this is the way it was polling. So the question for this set of data was, what is the biggest problem facing today's students? And I'm going to share with you some of the top 7 responses from that data. Okay. The biggest problem, number 1, the top biggest problem facing students today is that students are leaving high school unprepared for real life. Students are leaving high school unprepared for real life. Now, this one is the one that actually polled actually more even from all of the other ones. Both the Democrats and the Republicans. Democrats were at 43%, saying that students are leaving high school unprepared for real life, and the Republicans said 45%. High school students are leaving high school unprepared for real life. Real life, okay? Now, when we get into the next ones, you're going to see a lot of difference. There's going to be a lot of difference. So here we go. The second statement, the second leading top response was education has become too politicized. Now, the one leading in that group is the Republicans. 41% of them say that education has become too politicized, with 20% of Democrats saying that same statement. Now, if we go to the next one, I'm going to move to the inappropriate teaching / content. Inappropriate teaching / content. I'm going to give you the number. The group that leads in that belief is 40%, and they are the Republicans. And 12% of the Democrats say the top problem is inappropriate teaching and content. That's a big difference. About 30% swing from those two groups believing what's inappropriate and what's not. So you can imagine, as we start talking about language, what is appropriate to teach, what is inappropriate to teach means a big deal to people. Okay. Now, the next one is lack of support and respect for teachers. A lack of support and respect for teachers. 30% is what the Democrats polled at. 17% for the GOP, about half of that. That there's a lack of support and respect for teachers. There's an agreement amongst the Democrats, and the Republicans don't agree. 17% only agree. Now, the last two are important, right? And these are pretty close to each other and similar. The statement says schools are unsafe. There's too much violence. 34% of Democrats say that is the case. 17%, exactly half, say from the Republicans. So right there, with just the amount of data that we're talking about, for the amount of numbers that we can look at, we can say there's a big difference in what they value or what's important. But those are the top 7. They're still the top 7 that turned out overall, but they are polling very different in different groups. Very important for us to understand. So the reason that we're going to have to talk about why these differences are happening is also about how we're describing them, how we're discussing them. Now, because they poll very evenly at students are leaving high school unprepared for real life, let's talk about language. Because if they both agree on that, there's something in that statement that makes sense. There's something in that statement that makes sense for both groups because they both agreed at 43 and 45%. So now we're going to move into describing some of the concepts that Frank Luntz talked about around words to use and words to lose. Now, some of them, if you imagine a long list of words that talked about words that we should use more of and words we should lose, is if we're going to begin having conversations with people who don't think like us, it's important that we don't lose them in the beginning of the conversation. And so basically what's been happening, what we've experienced, and what we're going to experience in real soon is this idea of where the languaging has caused us a problem. Now, let's move to words to lose and words to use. Words to use, words to lose. Let me read 2 sentences to you. I'm going to read 2 sentences. And I think if you can hear these 2 sentences and think about how do they do with people out in the world, like which one got the most attention from people out in the world, which one felt like it was a sentence that made more sense to people out in the world. Here's the first sentence. Every school in America should be effectively preparing every student either for college, a career, and real life in the real world. No exceptions, no excuses. Okay, that's sentence one. Every school in America should effectively prepare every student either for college, a career, and real life in the real world. No exceptions, no excuses. Now I'm going to read the second sentence to you. Here we go. We have a once in a generation opportunity to build something better and to make a thoughtful, lasting change that puts students first. Read the second one again. We have a once in a generation opportunity to build something better and make a thoughtful, lasting change that puts students first. Now, if we wanted to think about what we should be doing in terms of education, what should be our marching orders moving forward, you may think sentence one. Maybe you think about, okay, sentence one actually sounds something more like I'm in line with, and which one thinks sentence two? Now, polling wise, the way how they did, sentence number one, which was every student in America should effectively prepare every student for either college, a career, and real life in the real world. No exceptions, no excuses. That one received 31% of people who were in favor of that sentence. And the other sentence only received 9%, almost 3 times less. We have a once in a generation opportunity to build something better, to make a thoughtful, lasting change that puts students first. So I think both sentences sound good. But if you think about what is going to get people's attention, that's going to have them be able to move into action, the first sentence I read was the one that took the top prize, if you want to say it's a prize. And why? Because it's about being specific. It's about being specific. It's about being clear about what not only our languages is using, but how are we making sense of the words that we're talking about. Here's the way that Frank described the why. Why did one of those sentences do better than the other one? Here's the description. They're looking for tangible results. Parents, community, people who are going to make these decisions in the world, they're looking for tangible results. Conceptual statements like build something better lacks a measurable result. Put students first is a political slogan, not an outcome. So if we're not careful, we begin to have conversations about education that begins to sound way too political, and it doesn't give meaning. If we're going to help education transform, if we're going to make schools better, if we're going to try and engage more men into the education environment and into schools, we're going to have to communicate about schools differently. It may have the same meaning, but it's how we communicate about it is what's going to decide whether someone says, you know what, I'm an engineer right now. Why would I leave my engineering career to become a teacher? You're not going to get them with the money. It's not going to be a money decision. It's going to get them by understanding that it taps into a part of their soul that says, this is a part of the thing I want to change in the world. Now, this is just one element. I'm talking about recruiting teachers. But because we know that the education lacks such a large number of men in education, we're going to have to do something different. We're going to have to talk about it different. We're going to have to communicate different. So also what you're going to see, if you go watch the video on YouTube or watch it on one of the places where you can see the video, you'll see the slides that I'm talking about. So I put the slides from the conference on there for you to see. So I'm going to read a couple of them for you, okay? Words to use. Prepared for real life in the real world. Words to lose. Prepared for college and career. Words to use. Prepared for life beyond the classroom. And words to lose. Student personal responsibility. Problem solving. Yes. Problem solving is important. Experiential learning. Do you think experiential learning is important? Well, maybe some people do think experiential learning is important. Problem solving does much better than experiential learning. Challenging and rigorous. Is that good? Maybe so, but it doesn't do as good as motivating and engaging. Does mastery and memorization sound good to some people? Well, it doesn't do as good as critical thinking. So we're going to have to begin having deeper conversations around how we're describing what we're doing, how we're describing what the value of education is, because otherwise we're going to continue experiencing what we experience, where people are making judgments and they're voting that are against their own best interests, that are against their children's best interests, because they've heard a sentence, a statement, a phrase that has somehow sent them into a place of not understanding how it benefits their children. Most parents will tell you, if they're willing to tell you, that their child is the most important thing to them. The most important person. Maybe, yes, we should care about all kids and every kid in this school, but they care about their child. Is my child getting the education they need? Is my child being prepared for the real world? And I think that we hear that over and over again. So anyway, those are the things I want you to kind of think about as you think about what words we're using and what words we need to probably lose. And it may take a while, because it took me a minute as I was listening to this, and I've been grappling with these concepts over the last couple of weeks. But I'm really excited about how we are understanding it more, about how education needs to transform. And if we're going to transform education, we're not going to get it if we're continuing to put people in those seats who are making those decisions, who don't really see us and see how our values match, how we connected, have so many things in common. And yet, because we're talking about them in two different ways, then they are missing each other. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to move to number 3. And number 3 is the matriculation problem in the United States. Now, when I say the matriculation problem, here's what I can tell you. I know California, and I know Bay Area, California very, very well. And I've learned from people around the country about not only what's happening in those places, but I'm going to speak to what I 100% know, not only as a teacher, as an administrator, both in the high school level, middle school level, charter, public, private, all the different levels of education. I want you to know that this is what I'm going to talk about, the matriculation problem. Now, here's a fact. If a student fails every class in the 6th grade, the 7th grade, and the 8th grade, here, let's say in the Bay Area, that student is going to the 9th grade. Now, let me say it again, just so you can let that sink in. If a student is going to let me say it one more time. If a student fails every class in the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, all of middle school, you failed every class. You showed up, you just didn't do much of nothing. Once middle school graduation happens, most of them won't let you walk the stage or do the ceremony, but you go into the 9th grade the next year. Is that a little bit more clear for you? I think it happens not only here in California, but it happens in other places around the country as well. Now, because I went to this conference about high school education, one thing that stood out to me as a former administrator in a middle school who was in charge of the 2.0s and below, like that was one of my roles. I was in charge of figuring out supports and systems for all students who had a GPA of 2.0 and below. Now, the ABCs of success in high school by Johns Hopkins says that attendance, behavior, and core class success are your major things to look at. Attendance, behavior, and core class success. How well your attendance is, I want to say the percentage is having attendance less than 90%. Behavior, having one suspension or multiple referrals. And core class success, which is different for high school, middle school level. Your early warning signs of dropping out would be that in middle school, you're failing your core classes, math, science, English. And in high school, if you're failing any class, it's an early warning sign. So using that kind of structure, we know that there's an importance about how do we evaluate how students are doing in school, the early warning signs of dropping out. If you have failed every class in middle school and then they move you to high school where the rules change. Now, when you go to high school, the rules change. The rules are you don't pass these classes, you are not going to have enough credits to graduate. There were no credits required before. Now there are credits required. If no one sat you down and said, hey, student A, B, C, hey, let me just let you know that this process that you've been doing the last 3 years is not going to work for the next 4 years. If you don't pass classes, you don't graduate. Now, when I became a high school freshman teacher, my first teaching job, I saw students who were failing algebra, smart students, coming to school every day doing nothing. Now, I didn't know this. I didn't know this data. I didn't know that many of these students had failed every class in middle school. So they thought they were just going to come to high school, do the same song and dance they normally did, and then they were going to move through the process. Now, the school I was at, the way it worked was that algebra was the first class you take. So a student fails algebra, which was one semester long because we were on the block schedule. We had double about the amount of time for classes. They would the next semester be back in algebra again. Now that first year, it almost wouldn't even, it'll be oblivious to them because they were still with other freshmen in the class. They didn't get to move on to algebra 2. They didn't get to move on to the next class. They stayed in algebra, but they were with their friends still. So they were like, oh, I'm still good. Now, by the time the next year rolled around, they're in their second year of high school, but they're still in a ninth grade class. And many of them will be upset. They'll be like, why am I in this class with all these freshmen? And I mean, because they asked the question out loud, I mean, I have an option to whether I'm going to answer the question out loud. Now, I didn't want to like front them off in front of their peers because that's not nice. I mean, even though, you know, even though deep down in my sarcasm, like I want to say, do you sure you want to know this answer? I mean, you want to talk about this in front of everybody or you want to come to the side and talk about it? How did you not realize that you failed algebra twice last year? Or even if they didn't give you algebra the second time, you didn't pass it, so therefore you have to do it again. A lot of times the rules didn't get explained to them clearly that you must do another level of work here. That's a problem. Now, when I was at one of our local schools here, one of our continuation schools, I described to those students what it felt like to have to tell a student who was a junior in high school to call them in my office. He's kicked out of class for some reason. He has a referral for something, whatever he's doing. He comes in. My first thing is to pull up your grades. Like, okay. And I'm looking at the computer with one young man sitting in front of me. He's mad because he got kicked out of class. I'm not even getting into the reason he's kicked out of class. Like, let me just see who you are on a paper. Like, I'm seeing you in front of me. The teacher says you did this. You're mad about something. Let me just see what I can see. And all I can see is numbers and data. And when I pull up this transcript, I can see your grades from middle school, and I can see your grades from right now where you've been in high school. And to see a student who has not passed a class in 5 years, maybe got a D in one class, maybe got maybe a C. I'm talking about if I would remember these conversations, most of these students have Fs all the way down. 0 credits, junior year of high school, getting kicked out of class. Now, you weren't on my radar before because it's the way that works, right? The way I was a dean that year. I'm dealing with some of the disciplines. I'm dealing with student supports. But you weren't. I'm not a counselor. I'm not looking at grades as a holistic number and how students are doing grades wise and calling students in to have conversations with them about their academic performance. That wasn't my role. I was a dean that year. And when I'm looking at this student, I'm like, hey, have you seen your transcript? And I have a student be like, no, I'm not. And you hand them the transcript. And what it does is it shows you the deficit in red. Like the red is like, here's where you should be, right? Credits. Here's where you are. Like to have 0 credits by the time you're junior, and you should have close to 60, maybe. I don't know the exact numbers. I'm like, do you know that you're not going to graduate? Like, and then you go back and look at the other data from the middle school, and you're like, you have not passed a class for a long time. What's happening? What's been going on? And this is a situation. This is me talking about one student, one conversation. But I'm talking about I've had dozens of conversations with students who are in similar situations. Maybe they don't have 0, but they got less than they're supposed to have. They have less than is even possible to make up. And so then you have to coach them into another situation. Hey, you're going to have to go to a continuation school. Hey, you're going to have to go to a different school. You're going to have to go to get your GED. Like, you're not going to graduate. And those conversations are not fun to have, but they are critical for us as educators to have with students earlier. Now, listen, a 14-year-old coming to high school, a freshman, is probably somewhat immature, different levels of immaturity, but they're growing up. And so it's important as educators that we have conversations with students earlier. Now, listen, I'm talking about middle school education. Why am I so passionate about it? Because the high school problem doesn't start at the high school door. The problem with high school is that you have students coming from this other place. They come in, they've had different levels of responsibility at those places. Some went to schools where the rigor was high and the expectations were high and the engagement was high. And some went to schools where they were just high. I mean, pun clearly intended. I want us to know that if we're going to make a difference in education, it can't start at the door of high school. Although I was really excited about what things that are going to be happening and what things we need to do in order to transform education. But I'm clear that part of my call and my calling, not only because I was a teacher in that middle school, but because I was an administrator in the middle school in Oakland, who saw the huge disparities, what was happening with students when they showed up there in those doors. We have to do some work earlier. So listen, I hope that you have taken out some notes. I hope that you have some questions. I hope that you got some pushback because I'm ready for these conversations. We got to have these conversations, and we cannot just have the conversation in the echo chamber of our own friends who think like we think and don't push us to think deeper or bigger or wider in terms of education. Listen, it's going to require some tough conversations over this next year, and I hope that you're a part of those conversations. Thank you for being a part of these conversations with us. Listen, there's more to come. There was so much that happened at this conference that I couldn't get it all into one episode, but we are going to be talking about it more. And I hope that you heard something that actually sparked you. Hope maybe something made you upset. Maybe it shifted you from just being a passive listener to a person who says, I'm going to be a part of how we transform this, or I have more questions. Please send us an email. Put some notes in the comments. Like, let us know how we can have more of these conversations, because what we need to do now, today is January 2nd. Today, this is the new year. This is the first episode of 2025. It is in critical importance that we don't wait till 2023 to start talking about how to change education. We got to start right now. Right now is important. And so as we begin to bring more educators in these conversations, maybe you know somebody who's passionate about this topic. Please connect them with us and let us know. Let us invite them on the show and have a conversation with them, because these conversations are going to be tough. I'm sure I'm going to have conversations with people who are going to say things that I'm going to disagree with. And in this episode, in this show, this season, these conversations are happening right now. So, folks, listen, maybe you could feel some of the energy in this new episode of the 2025 year. I hope that you are ready for some big conversations, some big discussions. I hope you're ready for the work that is going to take ahead in order for education to be transformed for all students. That's what I think we need to do. So I invite you to be a part of this journey with us. We're excited about what's coming up in this 2025 year, and we want you to be a part of the journey with us. So stay tuned, write your questions, write your notes, get involved in the conversation. If you're not a part of the school community, we're going to be having conversations there and having meetups virtually until those meetups can be in person about how are we going to be a part of transforming education. It's the time. The time is now. The time has been before. But we as an organization and we as a part of these conversations, we're excited for you to be a part of it. Happy 2025. Thank you for being a part of this journey with us as we start the year. And we look forward to making these conversations ones that matter. See you soon, folks.